of the people of Gaza, what is happening to the life and property of the people of Palestine. And we've seen Gaza reduced to rubble and relentless, non stop bombing, killing, murder, savagery, brutality, you name it. It's taking place in Gaza as we speak right now. And the latest, we're talking about a ceasefire or a proposed ceasefire. And what is Hamas saying? Hamas is saying, does this ceasefire actually mean a continuation of killing in Gaza? And to unpack all of this morning, we're joined by journalist and researcher at the Media Review Network, Mariam Jooma Çarikçi. Mariam, assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Juma Mubarak and welcome.
Walaikum salam, Uncle Inayat. Juma Mubarak to you.
Yes, Mariam, I just quoted the farewell sermon of Nabi Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam, talking about life and property of every Muslim as a sacred trust. And when we talk about this sacred trust, we talk about the life and property of the people of Gaza, and we know we're going to be talking about the ceasefire proposal. But, just how sacred has the lives of the people of Palestine been?
Uncle Inayat, I think what you are basically raising today is a very painful reality, particularly as we are in the Hajj season. As Rasul Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam said, not even the Kaaba is more important than the life of a Muslim. So what we're seeing now, this absolute mass slaughter of children and innocents, is beyond conscionable for us as Muslims. But looking now, as you also introduced the ceasefire proposal, let's talk about that. I mean, we need to ask ourselves, what are the prospects for transitioning from this temporary to a permanent ceasefire, right? Because it happens every so often that there's a talk of a ceasefire, the Palestinians become overjoyed, hopeful, and then they plunged into worse disaster after that. So I think it's important for us to look at the fact that this U.S. proposal actually only centers on the 60-day truce, which is tied to the hostage prisoner exchange. So this is not a long-term solution. Israel's leadership, under Netanyahu, has continuously insisted that operations are going to go on until Hamas is destroyed. So from the Hamas side, obviously, they want to see a permanent ceasefire and a full Israeli withdrawal from Gaza, as is correct from international law, because an occupying force cannot, be in military, in a military position of occupation beyond what it has already been established. So without addressing the core demands now from both of these sides, which is disarmament and reconstruction guarantees, because you have to remember, I mean, Gaza is flattened. There's nothing left. We've seen reports this morning of a hospital, the last functioning hospital, that's also been given notification by the Israelis to close. So those core demands, disarmament, reconstruction, and political recognition, those are the three main areas that are going to be the contention points for any real long-term ceasefire. So at the moment, what I would say, this proposal is just a short-term de-escalation.
Well, certainly, Mariam. And also, I think once again, one needs to be skeptical about Benjamin Netanyahu and his intentions, because they've made the intentions very, very clear. Smotrich speaks about annihilation. We've seen Ben Gvir issue statements. It says, make them despair and leave. And again, when one looks at even the previous ceasefire as well, where Netanyahu obviously had not stuck to the agreement. And again, we see Israel signing off a proposal, but can they actually be trusted?
No, definitely. Look, Netanyahu looks at his position very much from a self-interested one. we've seen, although international media don't report it as extensively as it should be reported on, but the internal division within Israel is actually really ramping up. And that's not to say that Israelis, have finally had the penny drop and realized that this is a genocide. They themselves are not that interested in, maintaining humanitarian law and so on. For them, it's a matter of Netanyahu is a liability for their state. So you've seen, the US be slightly harsher on Netanyahu. The EU is definitely moving away from supporting Netanyahu. So within Israel, there's quite a significant, environment of extreme dissatisfaction with Netanyahu. And so this definitely impacts upon the decisions he makes with regard to the war on Gaza and the genocide on Gaza. So as you've rightly pointed out, Ben Gvir and Smotrich, those are two very senior far-right coalition members who have threatened in the past to collapse Netanyahu's government if any ceasefire stops short of what they call total victory over Hamas. So this constrains his room for diplomatic compromise. But on the Hamas side also, there's a very broad desire for a halt in the Israeli assault. I mean, the people have just been through everything, unspeakable crimes. So there's a pressure also on Hamas to find a way to stop this genocide. So they've got to weigh, the prisoner release against the accusations of conceding too much. Because at one point you have to say, well, we've come so far. Are we willing to give up at this point in terms of just stopping the bombing, or are we going to go, full throttle to the end, even in the face of starvation? And I mean, as an ummah, as you've suggested earlier, Uncle Inayat, this is pathetic that we are unable to do anything to even alleviate the hunger of a Muslim child in Gaza.
Yes, Mariam. But also, let's just try and unpack a bit more and understand the Hamas position a bit more clearly, because Hamas have made it very, very clear that this proposal does not satisfy their core demands, and this
Yes,
includes an end to the genocide.
yes. No, for sure, because they want an absolute full withdrawal. And as I mentioned earlier, this is in accordance with international law. So you can't have Israeli troops in Gaza under the pretense of having a ceasefire. We've seen the Israelis do this over and over again. So it's 2014, 2015, where they stopped, the guns stopped for a short time, the aid comes in a little bit, gives a facade of normality to the international community, and then it just gets worse. So this, lack of permanent ceasefire is a very, very challenging stumbling point to any kind of negotiation with the Israelis, because you cannot have troops on the ground and still say that you are committed to a ceasefire. Then secondly, there's the question of the humanitarian provision. Hamas has argued that, the current plan does not adequately address the humanitarian crisis. And we've all seen that. We've seen the international reports. We've seen Al Jazeera documentaries on the level of starvation. I mean, you cannot put a gun to a starving population's head, as we've said before. It's completely contrary to international law. And then the prisoner exchange, this is also very interesting and quite shocking part of the proposal. I mean, if we look at the sheer numbers of it. So while the proposal includes the release of hostages and Palestinian prisoners, there's a concern about the specifics, because Hamas has seen previously, when we don't say prisoners, I mean, these are often underage Palestinians that are just grabbed off the street that are put into prison. So Palestinians who are taken hostage by Israel are often released and then reincarcerated later. So there's no way to actually track whether or not Israel is sticking to what it has to do. And this is where the question of international monitoring is so important. We cannot have, as they suggested, a humanitarian agency simply between the US and Israel coordinating aid. You need the UN, you need international bodies who are experienced and who are able to monitor and basically call out violations. So it's asking the prisoner to monitor itself. I mean, it's impossible to do that. You need an outside force. And then finally, if we look at the Israeli military presence, we've had reports of increasing suicide and the desire to basically leave Israel and people not wanting to be part of the conscription. These are all positive points in the sense that there's an understanding that what is happening in Gaza is absolutely abnormal. And so if Netanyahu wants to move forward with this, he's going to have to ask himself where he will find these troops from, because increasingly young Israelis, who, as I said, might not necessarily be touched by their love for Palestinians, but by their own self-interest and mental health, will, refuse to be conscripted. And that's where we see the ties to Ethiopia, to India, and to other states that are pro-Israel, who might be cannon fodder for Netanyahu.
Yes, and also I think, Mariam, what you mentioned is very important, and particularly when one looks at even now, when we see this Gaza Humanitarian Foundation. Now, this
Yes.
huge question marks, very, very dubious as well. We've heard about the resignation, and also if we see the events of the last few days in terms of the humiliation that Palestinians need to or are experiencing, even with this Gaza Humanitarian Foundation providing some aid in certain areas, but they're being humiliated in the process.
Yes. No, for sure. Look, there have been reports that the actual Israeli soldiers that are part of this process are also working with criminal elements in Gaza, so as to actually, cause the chaos. So it's lovely to say for them, that look at these unruly Palestinians, and going back to that whole colonial gaze of the savage other. But we know and we've seen, and I think our listeners must be, kind of assured and inspired by the resilience of the Palestinian people, that the discipline in Palestine is such that there's not been a single Hamas guard who's watched over an Israeli hostage that has stood up and said, no, I'm willing to give this man up for my own safety. It is a collective struggle because it's a just struggle. And indeed, as you've suggested, the desire to humiliate the Palestinians is one of the core strategies for Israel. But Alhamdulillah, we have seen the resilience, and we should actually hang our heads in shame by the fact that despite suffering and starvation and murder, the Palestinians remain united.
Mariam, just finally, I just want to talk about the ceasefire plan and guarantees, because we've seen it with the previous ceasefire proposals. We saw countries like Egypt and Qatar
Yes.
guarantors, and when Netanyahu obviously broke the terms of that ceasefire deal, there were no guarantees, and it was again back to square one. Now we've seen what the latest year is talking about guarantees by Trump, by the mediators, by Egypt and Qatar, to make sure
Mm.
that aid is sent into Gaza as soon as Hamas signs. But we know that hasn't happened.
No, definitely. Look, if you look at the numbers, this U.S. plan actually includes the release of 1,100 Palestinian prisoners in exchange for 28 Israeli hostages. So that's 10 living and 18 deceased. So even just the sheer numbers, I mean, if we look at that, does that not already suggest how imbalanced and how ridiculous the power dynamics are? That you could have 1,100 Palestinians in exchange for 28. it speaks again to the worth of a Palestinian life, and comes back down to what we've always said about the white settler colonial project that is Zionism, that is Israel. So yes, definitely without an internationally guaranteed framework. For example, the past ceasefires in 2014 and 2021 also suffered from a lack of trust. They were very quickly violated. So what Hamas wants and demands is guarantees by non-Western or neutral actors. So they're looking at Qatar, Turkey, Russia, Egypt, and the UN to oversee the ceasefire, exchange, and reconstruction. And of course, we mustn't forget the wider objective here is statehood and self-determination. So by ending this siege of Gaza and lifting the blockade, there can be steps towards reintegrating Gaza into a unified Palestine. So with the West and issues around governance and who represents Palestinians can then be brought to the fore. Because we've seen, Lebanon talks with Mahmoud Abbas regarding the disarmament of Palestinian camps in Lebanon. And then we have to ask ourselves, who does Abbas speak for? Who and what is what is the aim, and who is backing basically a plan that emasculates the resistance?
Yes, Mariam. In fact, well, let's see what actually happens over the next few days. And we know at this point in time, Hamas had actually rejected the proposal. Israel has been very, very willing to actually accept this at this point in time. But I'm sure in the next day or two, we should get a lot more clarity. But for now, we thank you, Mariam. I know we were going to be discussing other issues like Starlink and Elon Musk, but hopefully we would at some point in time get to just be discussing that as well, inshallah. But for now, have yourself a great Jummah as well. And as always, we appreciate your time. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Walaikum salam. Thank you.
Mariam Çarikçi joining us this morning. And she is a journalist and researcher at the Media Review Network, and absolutely important, critical to discuss this ceasefire deal, and more importantly, what it actually means for the people of Palestine, and what it also means for people like us right across the entire world who are actually watching this horror amongst all horrors still unfolding before our very own eyes. The time is just gone 8:36. We're going to go for a quick break. We'll be back.